I think what really makes this show stand out are the way in which the artists have chosen to respond to a variety of issues. Quilts that respond to not only Syria or what's happening with migration communities from Africa and from Central Asia, but you have artists who have responded to what's happening with the wildfires in the West, or to what's happening to indigenous communities and climate change. And I think that that diversity is really important. Other artists who are the descendants of immigrants responding to their own family histories, and the way in which the legacy of displacement is passed on to future generations, and what that psychology of uprooting, and leaving your native land can do and change, you as an individual and as a person, and how that's passed on. One of the pieces that really surprised me when it came in was Mary Palmer's prayer. One, because the image that I initially was looking at, I didn't realize the dissolvable fabric was done in a way that essentially the piece looked translucent when we pulled it out. I mean, it was beautiful, it was delicate, it really was fascinating. And we had students here who were helping me with translation for another exhibition that we have on view, and when they walked past it, they immediately ran to the piece because they started reading the words from the Quran that had been essentially sewn into it. So what looks like an abstract piece is actually, a prayer completely done with life jacket pieces. And I think that, again, just attesting to that diversity of technique and media, I think really just shows and showcases the talent of the artists included in this show.
The story goes back to the many years that I spent with my husband trying to figure him out, because he was a child growing up during the Second World War. He was 6 years old when the war started in 1939. And he carried buckets of water to the roof. This Wuppertal, the city he was born in, was one of the first cities bombed in Germany during the war. And so he grew up with this. He walked down a street and saw tanks at a distance, and they were aimed at him, and he went like a mouse into a hole in the ground and disappeared. I mean, it was a frightening time. The buildings themselves are kind of, if I borrow the term from the literary world, they're metaphors for people. The people themselves were remnants too after the war, because they had to find places to live. They fled. You had people fleeing cities, and there were millions and millions that were displaced during the war times. And my mind takes me into places that I don't necessarily want to go. And so I basically deal with it in a way that I allow it to come into my soul, I allow it to creep, I let the evil and the dark spirits come into my soul, and they can reside there while I'm creating the piece, and then I shoo them out. I do. I actually literally do.
I'm a political activist, and I was always concerned about issues of social justice. So this is what I do. And I was really happy to see that SAQA had this kind of show, because it's the kind of work that I like to do. Amnesty it's the first art piece I ever did. I did it in 2008. And it was inspired by a story of a woman named Fauzia Kashinga, who was a Togolese refugee. And at the time I was working with refugees from Somalia. There was a big migration from Somalia at the time. And a co-worker of mine handed me this book about Fauzia. And it was just a very compelling story. Her father, who was progressive, so he didn't believe in female genital cutting, he died. And because it was a patriarchal society, she was forced to live with an aunt, and her mother had to go live with someone else because she would have had no income with a husband, gone. And she, she was immediately set up for marriage at the age of 17 to, I think, a man in his 40s. She managed to escape, and somehow she got to Germany. I'm not sure how. And in Germany, someone gave her fake ID and suggested that she seek asylum in the United States. And she just thought she'd go to her cousin's house and wait for her hearing, and it wasn't like that. They threw her in jail for 18 months. She just suffered terrible indignities, but this little Yale law student worked on her case, and eventually it came around. There was lots of delays. And so she was like a landmark case for gender-based refugee status, basically, asylum status. I think these are stories that need to be told.
I'm an immigrant from Germany. My mother was a refugee from an area of Germany that after World War II was rezoned as Poland, and she actually had to flee in the dead of night. Her stories are very similar to the stories of the Syrian refugees. So when this call went out, my first thought was my mother, but that was a little too personal. And then the Syrian refugees became my focus. The interviews that they did using art therapy were done in Turkey as the kids had left Syria. The children were aged 8 to 12, and they were given crayons and markers to make these pictures. And they probably were limited palette of colors, but the red really stood out to me. I mean, there was a lot of red in the pictures, and it was the dismemberments and blood and bombs and houses on fire. It's awful images that these children came away with that are burned into their memories. The pictures needed to be shown. The pictures needed to be seen. And so I just figured, how can I incorporate them in a quilt?
I have a lot of stories that I'm not even sure which are true and which I've made up. So, it could be some of it is my imagination, but everything I've read about the Cossacks and pogroms and anti-Semitism came through in this piece. My technique was really emerging when I was working on this piece, because I did come from the quilting world. It was the painting world and then the quilting world. And I always need to bring something else to it. There always has to be some experimentation, as if I'm a person like one of these acrobatic performers, like with the sticks and the bowls, and then they keep throwing more bowls, like how many bowls can you keep up in the air at the same time circling? And I seem to do that in every project. So sometimes people will say, well, why are your projects, why is there so much in them? And I can't not have so much. I think it's like a map of my brain or something, that's me, that's my essence. And it's really trying to get so many different things, but try to find a way where they work together and create a whole message. There is a lot to do with beauty and truth, and that this is truth, and to be among so many gifted people sharing the truth is really a real privilege, and I feel like I'm among a tribe, and that we're a tribe of all kinds of different people, and I think that's really the way that the world is supposed to be. And it's an especially important message at this time when so much is happening in the world.